All right, so this is our next lesson, which is the law of cosines. Our goal for today is I can use the law of cosines to solve for missing sides and missing angles in a triangle. Let's go ahead and re-rate yourself on how you feel about that. All right, well, these notes start with a warm-up. It says throughout the notes, round all answers to the nearest hundredth and angles to the nearest tenth when necessary. So that's for everything from now on for these notes and for the homework. So there is a warm-up, and it's find H. Okay, so if you look at this triangle here, this is an oblique triangle. It is not a right triangle. I could figure that out by finding this angle right here. But before I do that, well, actually, let's figure it out right now just to show that it's not a right triangle. So I'm going to go ahead and get my calculator out. You can use mental math too. But I'm going to need my calculator for what we're doing today, so I might as well grab that. So I have 39 plus 32. Oopsies. Delete that. Equals 71. 180 minus 71 is 109. So this is not a right triangle. So this is an oblique triangle, so I have to use the law of sines or the law of cosines. These notes are called law of cosines. We haven't learned law of cosines yet. So obviously this can be law of sines, but let's see why. If you look here, you have an angle, and then you have a side outside. So you have angle, angle, side, which is not SSS and not SAS, so we're using the law of sines. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make a proportion. All right, remember, whenever I do the law of sines, the first thing I say is there only one missing angle? I should find it, and I'm going to go ahead and fill that in case I need it. I might not need it, but you never know. Well, you do know, but I just do it either way. Okay, so let's go ahead and find my ratio that I do know. So the only side that I was given this side that's 40 and the angle opposite is 39. So there's my ratio that I do know. Sine of 39 degrees over 40 equals, and then I'm solving for, which side was it? Side H. So I'm going to put an H on side H, which is opposite of angle H. And I am going to now use that ratio. So sine of 32 over H. So it turns out I don't need that 109, but hey, we know it's not a right triangle because of knowing that 109. All right, let's go ahead and cross multiply. I have H times the sine of 39 is equal to 40 times the sine of 32. I have to get H by itself, so I'm going to divide both sides by the sine of 39. And I have H equals, and I'm ready to put this in my calculator. Your calculator needs to be in degree mode. Mine is still in degree mode. So we're going to do 40 sine of 32, close the parentheses on the 32, divided by sine of 39, hit enter, and I'll get my answer here, which is 33 point. Sides, it said round to the nearest hundredth, which is 2 decimal places. I see 68 on my calculator, and there's a 2 next to it, so I'm going to keep the 68. So side H is 33.68 units long. Okay, so now let's recall what we learned yesterday. So yesterday we learned the law of sines, and we also talked about the law of cosines but didn't use it. We learned the law, we just didn't use it. So let's rewind and think of that. Law of sines is our proportion, which says that the sine of an angle, which I'll choose angle A, over its opposite side, which is side A, is equivalent to the sine of another angle, which I will use angle B, over its opposite side. Now, there is a third angle and a third side here. That's why it says that you could also choose the sine of angle C over C, but you're only ever going to set 2 ratios equal to each other to make a proportion. All right, law of cosines, as a reminder, is when if I was solving for either angle A or side A, and I was given SSS or SAS, I would use the equation A squared, side A squared is equal to the other 2 sides squared, B squared plus C squared, minus 2 times those 2 sides multiplied, B times C, times the cosine of angle, and then if this is side A, I'm using angle A right here. You can do the same thing with side B or angle B. So if you were solving for side B or angle B, it'd be B squared equals the other 2 sides squared minus 2 times those 2 sides multiplied times the cosine of that side B, so this is angle B. Last but not least, if it was side C or angle C, it'd be C squared equals a squared plus b squared minus 2 times a times b times the cosine of angle C. Now I'll repeat this again. We use the law of cosines if you're given 3 sides, SSS, or 2 sides with an angle in between. Everything else we use the law of cosines for. So what's left, or sorry, everything else we use the law of sines for. So what's left? Angle, 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 side, and then side, angle. Okay, so if you look at what we have here, we have practice, where we do also word problems, just one though. And then there's a mixed practice. So there'll be law of sines and law of cosines mixed in there, so you have to make sure that you're picking the right law to use. Okay, so here's our first one. It says solve the requested side or angle in each triangle, and we're still using the directions from above about rounding. So I need to find side A. So before I do that, I have to see what I'm given. I'm given a side, another side, and if you look, this angle is right in between. So what I'm given is side, angle, side. Side, angle, side tells me to use the law of cosines. So I need to see what I'm solving for. I'm solving for side A. So if I'm solving for side A, I'm using this first equation right here. A squared equals. Okay, so I'm going to do A squared equals. Now, I'm not going to look at the formula, and I don't think you should either. You should listen to my words here. It's the other 2 sides squared added together. So 12 squared plus 14 squared minus 2 times those 2 multiplied, 12 times 14, times the cosine of, and then if this is side A, I put angle A right here. So angle A is 73 degrees. All right, now I have to solve for side A. I have to get A by itself. So look where A is. It's on this side of the equation, and it's almost by itself. We know how to get rid of a square. How do we get rid of a square? We square root. Usually we do plus or minus, but this is the length of this side, okay? So I know the answer is going to be positive. So when I go to solve this, I do not need to account for the negative value because the negative length is not going to work for this. So I have A is equal to, and now I just have to carefully type this in my calculator. So I'm going to start with square root, 12 squared plus 14 squared, minus 2, parentheses 12, close the parentheses, open a new one, 14, close it. Cosine is 73. Close the parentheses, hit enter. This is a side length, so we're using 2 decimal places to the nearest hundredth. 15 point. I see 54 on my screen, but there is an 8 next to it. So I'm going to round that up to 55. Okay, let's move on to the next one. The next one says find the measure of angle C. Notice it's an oblique triangle. I can't use SOHCAHTOA. So I'm going to use law of sines or law of cosines. Let's see what we have here. Side, side, side. If I have 3 sides, side, 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 I use the law of cosines. All right, so law of cosines, I need to see what angle I'm solving for. I'm solving for angle C, okay? So if I'm solving for angle C, I'm using this formula that starts with side C squared. So I'm going to write down side C squared. So that's 12 squared equals. Okay, once again, try not to use the formula. Think of what comes next. The other 2 sides squared, 14 squared plus 15 squared, minus 2 times 14 times 15 times the cosine of angle C, which is what we're solving for. All right, now I need to solve for angle C. If you look at angle C, it is definitely not easy to get by itself. Well, it's not one step like square rooting. So here's what you're going to do. You are going to get 3 numbers. I call them buckets. I want you to make this an equation with 1 variable and 3 numbers. So here's your first bucket. Your second bucket comes from these 2 numbers, and your third bucket comes from these 3 numbers. So the first one I'm going to do is 12 squared. 12 squared is 144 equals. All right, now I want the next bucket. I don't want to know what 14 squared is. I don't want to know what 15 squared is. I want to know what 14 squared plus 15 squared is, and I'm going to write that down. So that's 421, and then I have minus. I don't want to know what 2 times 14 is. I want to know what 2 times 14 times 15 is. I forgot my 2, so let's put that in there. Times 15. Okay, so I'm going to push enter, and I get 420. 420. And then I have cosine of angle C. All right, now I'm getting closer to solving for angle C. So I will tell you I don't know how to say this, the wrongest thing people do, the most common mistake people make, and it's not a good mistake. Here's the most common mistake people make. I'm going to give you an easier algebra problem, and you tell me how to solve it. 10 equals 6 minus 2x. Okay? If I said solve that equation, and I said what's the first thing I have to do, would anyone say do 6 minus 2? Hopefully not, because that's not what you do. I need to get rid of this 6 by subtracting 6 from both sides. I'll have 4 equals negative 2x. All right, because those cancel. And then I would divide by negative 2 to get x by itself, and I get x equals negative 2. You have to use the same process to solve this equation. Please do not do 420. Oopsies, that wasn't supposed to be erased. 421 minus 420. Absolutely not. The 420 is stuck to that cosine of C. It is multiplied by cosine of C. So I have to get rid of this 421 first. So let me get rid of all this example algebra over here, and let's actually solve this. All right, so we're going to subtract 421 from both sides. 144 minus 421 is negative 277 equals, this is gone, negative 420 cosine of angle C. All right, so now remember, this is negative 420 times cosine of angle C. And I want to get angle C by itself, which means I have to get rid of that cosine, but I have to get rid of that negative 420 first. Since it's multiplication, I can get rid of it by dividing both sides by negative 420. Don't touch your calculator yet. This is gone now. So now I have cosine of C is equal to negative 277 over negative 420. Don't turn that into a decimal. It's not a nice decimal. I don't want to make it more difficult than it actually is. All right, now I'm ready to get angle C by itself. So to get angle C by itself, I have to get rid of cosine. How do I undo a cosine? We use cosine inverse. So I'll cosine inverse this side, cosine inverse this side. This cancels, and I have C equals cosine inverse of negative 277 over negative 420. And now I'm ready to put this in my calculator, and it'll give me the measure of angle C. Cosine inverse negative 277 divided by negative 420. And that gives me my angle, which we're rounding to 1 decimal place, is 48 point. I see a 7 on my screen, and there's a 3 next to it, so I'm keeping the 7. And angles are in degrees. So notice angles are more difficult, or I should say more multi-stepped, than solving for sides using law of cosines. Okay, let's go ahead and do the next one. Not a right triangle. I have to use law of sines or law of cosines. I see that I have 3 sides again. So this is just like the last one. 3 sides means I have to do the same steps to get angle A by itself. All right, so I'm solving for angle A. If I'm solving for angle A, I'm going to use my first equation up here, which starts with A squared. So I'm going to do side A squared. A is 11. So I'm going to do 11 squared equals the other 2 sides squared. 7 squared plus 9 squared, and those can be switched. I just like doing smallest to biggest personally. Minus 2 times 7 times 9 times the cosine of angle A. All right, notice that angle A is stuck on that right-hand side, and there's some work to do. So we're going to get our buckets of 3 numbers. 1 bucket, 2 buckets, 3 buckets. 11 squared is 121. I need 7 squared plus 9 squared. and I get 130 minus 2 times 7, 2 times 7 times 9, that's not a 9, is 126, cosine of A. Once again, do not do 130 minus 126. That's not how algebra works. I need to subtract 130 from both sides. I get negative 9 is equal to negative 126 cosine of angle A. I need to get cosine of angle A by itself so I can use the inverse. So next, I'm going to undo multiplication by dividing by negative 126. This is gone. So now you have cosine of A is equal to negative 9 over negative 126. I need to get rid of that cosine. To undo a cosine, I use cosine inverse. Cosine inverse both sides. This cancels. I have A equals cosine inverse of negative 9 over negative 126. And I'm going to put this in my calculator to give me angle A. So cosine inverse, negative 9 divided by negative 126. Enter. And I get 85 point. There's a 9 on my screen with a 0 next to it, so 85.9 degrees. Okay, next we have a word problem, and it says you're heading to Beach Mountain for a ski trip. Unfortunately, Road 105 in North Carolina is blocked off due to a chemical spill. You have to get to Tyne Castle Highway, which leads to the resort at which you are staying. NC 105 would get you to Tyne Castle Highway in 12.8 miles. So I'm going to go ahead and label NC 105 12.8 miles while I'm here. So this is 12.8 miles. The detour begins with an 18-degree veer off onto a road that runs through the local city. It's already labeled 18 for me, so I don't have to guess which one's 18. After 6 miles, there's another turn that leads to Tyneway Castle. Assuming that both roads on the detour are straight, how many extra miles are you traveling to reach your destination? Okay, so let's also get that 6 miles in there. So it says after 6 miles, there's another turn that leads to Tyneway Castle. So this right here is 6 miles long. So what I want to find is that they did not give me how long this is. So I would like to take this road is what they're saying. That's the easy way. But instead I have to go this way, then this way. So I need to find out how long is this road right here? How many miles long am I going out of my way? It's 6 miles plus that is how long I'm actually going to, how far it is away from me. So we're going to call that X. All right. Let's look to see what we were actually given. We were actually given this side, and this angle. So we were given SAS, side, angle, side. Side, angle, side uses the law of cosines. So I'm looking for this side right here. So I'm going to start with this side squared. So I'm going to do X squared equals my other two sides squared, 6 squared plus 12.8 squared, minus 2 times 6 times 12.8, times the cosine of the angle opposite of the side I'm looking for, cosine of, and that is 18. Is that going to fit in there? Sure is. All right, I am solving for X. If you look at X, it's almost by itself. I just got to get rid of that square by square rooting. Don't have to worry about plus or minus, remember, because this is a length, which is positive. So I'm going to do square root of 6 squared plus, that's not 6 squared, 6 squared plus 12.8 squared minus 2 times 6 times 12.8 times cosine 18. All right, so X is 7 point, remember lengths of sides, 2 decimal places, 3 miles. All right, so now I know that this is 7.33 miles long. So if you look at the path that this car actually took, it took the 6 miles and then 7.33. So I'm going to add 6 to this, plus 6 and I get 13.33 miles. So the car actually took 13.33 miles to get to Tynecastle Highway. I don't know, Tynecastle Highway. Now, if it would have taken North Carolina 105, it would have only taken 12.8 miles. So the question is how many extra miles did it take to reach your destination? So I'm going to subtract 12.8 miles from that. 13.33 minus 12.8. And how much did we go out of our way? A half of a mile. So I went out of my way 0.53 miles. All right, so that's it for straight up law of cosines. The rest of this is mixed practice. So if you feel like, okay, I'm good, but I should do some practice, these are the problems that you should do next. I will continue to do these, but if you're good, then you don't have to worry about watching the rest of the screencast. All right, so here's some mixed practice. First, I'm going to look for what I'm given. So this is not a right triangle. I have to use law of sines or law of cosines. Angle, side, angle. It's not SAS. It's not SSS. So I'm using law of sines. So I'm going to set up my proportion. Once again, I always like to look to see if there's a missing angle for law of sines, and there is one, so I'm going to fill it in. 78 plus 32 is 110. 180 minus 110 is 70 degrees. All right, so now I'm going to start with the ratio I do know, which is sine of 70 over 15. So I needed that 70. And then solve for x, which is across from 32. So I'm going to use sine of 32 over x. Cross multiply and solve for x. X times the sine of 70 is equal to 15 times the sine of 32. Divide by sine of 70 to get x by itself. Put that in my calculator. 15 sine of 32, close the parentheses on the 32, divided by sine of 70. And I got 8.45 on my screen. But right next to it is an 8. So I'm going to round it up to 8.46. Once again, you can try these on your own and then fast forward through me talking just to see the answer. And if you got the answer right, you're doing them right. All right, let's look at the next one. Let's see what we have. We have two sides and an angle in between. So we have side, angle, side. Side, angle, side uses the law of cosines. So now I'm going to use the law of cosines. I'm solving for x, which is a side, so I'm going to start with x squared equals the other two sides squared, 12 squared plus 15 squared, minus 2 times 12 times 15 times the cosine of, and now I need the angle opposite of x, which is 32. I need to get x by itself. X is almost by itself. It's just squared right now, so I'm going to square root both sides. X equals, and I need to put this in my calculator. So square root of 12 squared plus 15 squared minus 2 times 12 times 15, and notice I'm putting those in parentheses, cosine of 32. And I get x is equal to 7.98. And next to the 98 is a 1, so I'm keeping 98. Okay, next one's an angle, and so is the fourth one. So make sure you're running to one decimal place. Let's see what we have here. Side, side, not an angle in between, outside. So side, side, angle. That means I'm using the law of sines. All right, I'm going to set up my proportion here. See if I have a missing angle I can find, and I'm missing two angles. So I'm just going to get going on the law of sines. Ratio that I do know. Sine of 78 over 8. See what I'm solving for, which is x, and that's across from the 5. So sine of x over 5. All right, time to solve for that angle x. Let's cross multiply. 8 times the sine of x is equal to 5 times the sine of 98, 78. All right, I need to get x by itself, but it's attached to that sign. I can't get rid of that sign until I get rid of this 8. That's multiplication, so I'm going to divide. Divide by 8. These 8s cancel. I like to move this over so it's like you're gone. and now I'm here. To get rid of that sine, I use sine inverse. So I'm going to sine inverse both sides, and I have sine inverse of 5 times the sine of 78 over 8. X equals, and now I'm ready to type this in my calculator. Sine inverse, 5 sine 78, close the parentheses on the 78, divided by 8, hit enter. This is an angle measure, so 37.1 decimal place. There's a 6 on my screen, but an 8 next to it, so I'm rounding it up to a 7. 37.7 degrees. All right, the very last one. I got to look to see what I have, and I can see that I have side, side, side. So I'm using the law of cosines. Do I start with the 8 squared, the 12 squared, or the 15 squared? Well, if I'm looking for x, I want to start with the side opposite of that. So I'm going to start with 8 squared. The other two sides squared added together, 12 squared plus 15 squared, minus 2 times those two multiplied, times the cosine of, and that angle is called x. I could have called it angle A if I wanted to, but I labeled it x for you. All right, notice that x is stuck on that right-hand side. This is law of cosines. I need to do buckets to get that x by itself. So 3 buckets. 8 squared is 64. I need 12 squared plus 15 squared, which is 369, minus, I need 2 times 12 times 15, which is 360, cosine of x. All right, remember, don't do 369 minus 360. That's not how algebra works. Subtract 369 from both sides. I have 64 minus 369 is negative 305 equals negative 360 times cosine of x. Remember, there's multiplication here. Get rid of that negative 360 by dividing. Don't put it in your calculator yet. You have cosine of x is equal to negative 305 over negative 360. To get rid of cosine, I use cosine inverse. So I'm going to cosine inverse both sides, and I have a cosine inverse of negative 305 over negative 360. So now I can put this in my calculator. Cosine inverse, negative 305 divided by negative 360. This is an angle measure, so I'll be rounding to the nearest 10th place, which is 1 decimal place. 32 point. I see a 0 on my screen, but there's an 8 next to it. So I'm going to go up to 1 degrees. All right, that's it for law of cosines and mixed practice. You can go ahead and rewrite yourself on how you feel about law of cosines.